Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's live stream How to Build a Newsletter System with n8n. My name is Harshil Agrawal, and I work as a junior developer advocate at n8n. And today, here joining me will be Jason. You might know him as Teflon Dude as well. So, Jason, you might have also come across Jason on the community forum or on Twitter or even on a Discord server. Jason has been building some useful workflows in n8n, and today he is going to teach us how he built a newsletter system with n8n. So let's welcome Jason on the stream. Hey Jason, how are you doing?
Good, good. How about you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, no, not a problem. It might be 6:30 a.m. here in Canada, but I think the rest of the world is already well ahead of me, so that's good.
What? Wow. Okay, that's crazy. I didn't knew that. All
Uh,
right. So Jason, I just touch the iceberg of what you do. I'm just touch the tip of the iceberg of what you do. So do you want to introduce yourself?
sure. So yes, as Harshil had mentioned, I'm well known as Teflon or Teflon Dude throughout the Twitterverse and the rest of the internet. So what do I do? Well, I like to say that I know a little about a lot. I'm a technology guy. I I dabble in all kinds of stuff. So what you're seeing kind of a little bit behind me here, interesting. And about a year ago, I stumbled upon this crazy design tool called n8n that just kind of captured my imagination. And all of a sudden, I started playing around with things. And I guess thanks to the pandemic, I've got a bunch of cool friends across the world now.
That's awesome. Wow. So when you started with n8n, I saw that you were mainly involved with Raspberry Pi, and you were trying to host n8n on the Raspberry Pi.
Mhm.
So how was that? How was that experience?
So I've always been interested in the Raspberry Pi as a tool itself, simply because it's inexpensive, which is always the big thing for me. I grew up in on a farm in rural Manitoba, Canada, and we didn't have tons of stuff. We didn't have all kinds of things, but I always had stuff I could work with, and
Mhm.
because of that, I've always had this mentality of let's see what you can do with what you have. And when I started seeing the Raspberry Pi floating around a number of years ago, I really latched onto it because you can do pretty much anything you want on the Raspberry Pi, but it was just smaller, cheaper, and lower powered. So, instead of buying one computer, I went out and you can't see it here, but to my right, I've got a 10 node Raspberry Pi cluster that I built.
Wow.
And actually, even behind me here, this is the beginnings of a 7 node Raspberry Pi cluster. And so each one of these that looks like a stick of memory, that's actually a computer. That's a full Raspberry Pi. So that is the kind of stuff that I've been playing around with. And so I found that it was interesting that I could jump into n8n on the Raspberry Pi. The fact that it took me a few days to kind of figure it out initially. N8n took a slightly different direction as to how they're doing things. They took a logical direction because they were using Docker. But because n8n is so small and the amount of power that it has, you wanted to kind of make sure that you used it as efficiently as possible. So I built a whole new way of installing n8n. I've got customized ways of running it as a server so that it's always running. When I reboot a system, it just keeps going. So that was really what kind of got me into all this. Is like, wow, here's this tool that's incredibly powerful that I can run on this really small computer system, kind of the best of both worlds. And I think my playing around with the Raspberry Pi kind of caught the attention of the n8n team over in Berlin.
Yeah, yeah. And I see we got Urpan in the chat, and we got Matthews as well. Hey folks, thank you for joining in.
Hey guys.
So I've got a quick question for everyone in the chat. Have you tried Raspberry Pi? And another interesting question: have you tried n8n on Raspberry Pi? That would be something that we would love to know.
Yeah,
So
and there's all
yeah.
kinds of Raspberry Pis out there. I showed you the little ones over there. here's kind of the latest one they've got out. So this is a fully self-contained Raspberry Pi. And no, we aren't sponsored by Raspberry Pi, but nudge, nudge, wink, wink, Raspberry Pi. Let us know.
All right, Jason. So let's come back to our main topic over here. So can you tell us what we are gonna build today, and what exactly you are gonna do?
Yeah. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to kind of look at things from a slightly different perspective and see what we can do with them and kind of push things to their limits, find out where the edges are.
Mm-hmm.
And this workflow that I've built does more or less that. Most of you will think of n8n as a tool that kind of connects different things together. So you'll get input from something and then you'll output it somewhere else.
Right.
Which really is what this does. But it kind of takes it a little bit beyond that. So the interesting thing about this workflow is it actually turns n8n more or less into a web server. And because it can turn it into a web server, I've built a way for it to create a web page and a form that you can submit information, saves it into a database, and allows you to do some automated interaction back and forth. So it's a little bit different than connecting A to B. We're actually building A inside n8n and then connecting it to B and doing some real-time interactions through email.
Well, this is a really interesting use case because like people perceive n8n as a platform where they can, just connect different services together and then just build their workflows. But building a whole, a system using n8n and making n8n the system A to connect it with system B is something that I would like to, learn more about today.
Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of interesting that, so what we see here being the finished product, this is actually what I'm referring to as version 1.0. Today, I think Harshil and I are going to see if we can actually improve on this and make it even a little bit smaller, a little bit more efficient. The way that I've built it out here is actually really good for demonstrations because it really breaks it up nicely. But there's ways that we can make some modifications. I think we can get rid of this node so that these are a little bit more separate. And there's even some possibilities if we wanted to go down that path, we might even be able to take all three of these webhooks and combine them into one. That might be a little bit more than what we're looking at today, but I think if we can get rid of this node, which I think is not going to be impossible, I think that would be worth doing.
Awesome.
So I think what we'll do is we'll probably start from top to bottom and try and build out, go as far as we can today. I unfortunately do have to go to a paid job somewhere along the line. So we'll take it. We'll go as far as we can. And if we got to go into live stream 2, 3, 45, that's fine too.
Awesome. All right. So Jason, do you want to show us a live demo of how it's going to look in the end?
Absolutely. So really the key to making this into system A, as it were, is the webhook. And so this sign up webhook here, and fairly straightforward. What it does is we don't use any authentication, anything. It's just wide open. We've created a sign up path. And take a look under our webhook URLs. I've started saying URLs way back in the 90s, and I can't get out of that habit. Everybody thinks I'm weird. Anyway, so the URL here is kind of where our page goes. So if we go to that page on the website, and there it is there, and you guys can all go to that website as well. Feel free to play around with it. This entire form here is actually generated by n8n. So you don't expect that when you're looking at a webhook URL. Most of the times you're expecting, well, you know what, we're just going to get some JSON maybe or maybe XML, but this is a full-blown HTML web page. So the key to that is this set node that we've built. It's not terribly exciting as far as the set node goes. It only has one value, and that's the HTML value. And that value is our web page. So there's tons of things going on in here. So we'll take a quick look at it, and that just looks like gibberish. But this is it. So this actually powers that web page. So you combine this, which is the HTML, and you combine this, which essentially provides the HTTP services, or
Right.
HTTPS, to generate this page right there. So,
Awesome.
so I can show you the HTML a little bit if you're interested.
Let's run this workflow alive and see what happens, and then maybe when we build the workflow, we can talk more about the HTML.
Sounds good. So there's really three parts here.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the part that's generating the registration
Mm-hmm.
that we have. We then have the submit. So when I hit submit here in this web page, it will actually take the contents of the form and submit it to here.
Okay.
So this will go through, it'll extract our submitted values.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got a little bit of JavaScript here. And it also goes and will pull in a random ID. So what this will do is it will create this random 25 character string.
Mm-hmm.
And that string will actually go in and add it into a base row table. So I've got a table here, which is empty right now. So it'll take that string, it'll take your first name, your last name, your email address, and write it all into here.
Interesting.
So the reason it does that is we need a way to confirm that you aren't just throwing some random email address in there.
Mm-hmm.
We want to make sure that we're capturing your email so that when we send your newsletter out, you'll get it. So we need to confirm that. And also that you're not playing a April Fool's joke on your buddy and signing him up to like 1,000 newsletters. So we want him to be able to kind of go, yeah, or, I want this, or no, leave me alone. So here is where it'll go, and it'll send out that email. And we just created a nice little field here, or sorry, this is the contents of the email. And we pull in all the data from the different fields. It'll then create the response page. So again, another HTML page. And this one's not nearly as scary as the other one. And then it will spit that out as a binary.
Oh, all right. Awesome.
Yep. So then what that does is it'll send you an email.
Mm-hmm.
When you get that email, there will be a link in that email.
Okay.
And that link will have embedded in it this webhook and also the number that was generated by this JavaScript.
Nice. So that would be unique for each sign up.
Correct. So what ends up happening is you will end up seeing, or actually what it does is it associates that string with that email.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So when those emails come in, or so when you click on that link, it comes in here and goes, yep, that subscriber has actually clicked on the link from their email. So they've got the link, they've got the email, they're together. It will go in, look up that person, make sure it's got the right link, and then update their page so that when you go into base row, it'll say, yep, confirmed.
Ah, nice. That's interesting. All right. I see a few messages coming in the chat. So SM says that they haven't tried n8n on Raspberry yet. Any particular advantage?
Actually, there's a few. One, cost. They are very inexpensive. You don't have to spend, a few $100 or even, or $1,000 on a computer. You can have a Raspberry Pi up and running, for about $40. I think in Canadian dollars. Sorry, there's my my Alexa decides to talk and decides to buy me an extra Raspberry Pi, which I'm good with. Um, the So the cost is the one part. The other part is the fact that they are small. You can put them pretty much anywhere you want. You don't have to have a big server room to store them. You know, that type of thing. They can sit on your shelf and away they go. The final thing is that you now have n8n on-prem. So there's, you know, we have n8n Cloud, and n8n Cloud is extremely important for what I do. But the nice thing about having n8n on-prem is that I can actually access data inside the network that I can't access from the cloud. So it allows me to have this nice little $40 computer that I can embed into my office, into my clients' offices, and for very little cost. And in fact, here's a little consulting tip. You could probably charge $20 to $30 a month and rent them out to your clients and essentially pay for the cost of your Raspberry Pi, you know, in a couple of months, and have them sitting in their clients. When they're done with it, you pull it back out and redeploy it. So they essentially pay for themselves.
That's nice.
That's the direction that I've kind of taken them.
And Chris says that he tried n8n on Raspberry Pi, and he thanks Jason you for for your installer that you created.
Yeah, so way back in the middle of the pandemic in 2020, I decided to build an installer. So if you go onto GitHub and you look for n8n-pi, I built an installer that you can literally take a fresh Raspberry Pi install, run the installer, it does a reboot, and it completely builds the latest version of n8n right into the Raspberry Pi. So you have a dedicated Raspberry Pi that will do all of that. And it's a fairly straightforward process. Only caveat I'll put out there is if you only have one Raspberry Pi and you've got like 1,000 other projects on it, if you run this, those projects will go bye-bye. So you want to make sure that get yourself a fresh, like your SD card. There's, you know, thousands of them. They're cheap enough, and grab one of those and run it on there. I'm actually working on an automated process of building out images so that instead of having to go and run the installer, you can actually just grab an image every time n8n updates. So once a week, it would build a brand new image. You can download the image, write it to an SD card, plug it into your Raspberry Pi, and you're done. So you don't even have to install anything.
Awesome. And we got a message from Matthew saying connection Brazil and n8n. Thanks for life. Thanks for joining us. We are glad that you joined in.
Yeah, thank you. It's great having people from all over the world. It's one of the nice things I like about working with n8n. I'm kind of the odd duck when it comes to n8n, that I'm not anywhere near Germany. So I kind of add a little bit of Canadian flavor. So thank you for bringing your Brazilness, as it were.
Awesome. And Thomas says that this is a really smart implementation for email signups. I agree. And that's what we are going to do today.
Yeah, that was kind of what got me thinking about this. Is we have all these processes. I do a lot of work with low code, no code developers, and this was something that a lot of them will actually go and pay $10, $15 a month to have this as a service. And I thought, well, why don't we just build an n8n, download n8n, take that $40, put it towards a Raspberry Pi, load this on, and you don't even have to worry about it. It just happens.
That's awesome. Wow. NSM is asking any existing tutorial for setting up n8n. So I already have shared the link that Jason mentioned for the n8n Pi. So SM, you can just follow along that. If you get into any kind of issues, I think he can reach out to you via the community forum Teflon, right?
Yes, and actually I have. I'll send it to you, Harshil, in the chat. I've also created a video on how to do a base installation of n8n on any Debian system, of which Raspberry Pi is one. And it walks through the tutorial in a video. takes about 3 to 4 minutes, and you're up and running. And that one is actually non-destructive, so you can put it on an existing Raspberry Pi.
All right, that's awesome. So now let's get back to our newsletter workflow because
Yeah,
I am very curious to build it.
cool.
All right, so now I'm gonna share my screen,
Okay.
and this is now a blank canvas. I don't have anything. So l- remembering what we had on your workflow. So we first need the webhook node, right?
That's right. The webhook
Awesome.
node is key to this workflow. It provides us the ability to show the forms,
Mhm.
and essentially becomes the web server. And it also does the processing. So it allows us to grab the information when we're submitting it.
Awesome. Uh, since we don't need any authentication method, I'm gonna keep it to none.
Yep,
The HTTP method should be here get, right? We are not posting any
correct.
information. We are just getting that information.
Yeah, so it's very important that you have get as the HTTP method,
Mhm.
only because that's what a typical web server uses. So because we're replicating a web server, we need to replicate its functions. And the get is what your typical web browser uses when it's
Mhm.
grabbing information and displaying a web page. So in behind the scenes, that's what your web browser is doing. Is it's giving you a get request, and then the web or the server is going, oh, okay, you want me to give you some files. So that's what we're doing here. This is replicating that.
All right. And the response mode here, we need to have a different response mode if I'm not wrong.
Correct. So the default response node is on received. So it's kind of designed that the webhook is on its own
Mhm.
and doesn't have anything else connected to it. Basically, all it does is for testing purposes, it goes, yep, that's great. Here I am. So we need to change that. So we're going to change the response mode to last node.
All right. Okay. So now I see some other options as well.
Yeah. So that changes. We're going to use for the response data is the first entry binary.
Okay. Mhm.
So guess question there is what does that do?
Yeah.
Because we do have our response data types. We got the all entries, first entry JSON, first entry binary.
Yeah.
The reason we're using first entry binary is that when you are serving up information, it's actually looking for files.
Mhm.
So what it does is it will actually let you see the contents of a file, or in this case, a binary. So a binary really is no different than a file on your system, except it is already in a base 64 format that is ready for streaming. So that's why we use the binary. And we are actually going to store our binary in the HTML property. So when you pick
Mhm.
first entry binary there, click on that, and so we're going to put that into the HTML property name.
All right.
Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to replicate what we have first, and then once
Mhm.
we've replicated it, we're going to come back here and we're going to make a couple of changes because there's a different way of doing it that's a little bit more efficient that I want to show everybody as well.
All right. So now what I am doing is I'm saving this workflow. So this will basically register my webhook.
Yeah. And this is an important piece, and I guarantee you, every single time I write a node with a webhook first time I run it, I always do it wrong. I always forget to save it because I just am excited to get it up and running. And
Ex-
the saving is a very important part because what it does is it tells n8n, hey, I need to activate this webhook. I need to make sure that this webhook is working properly.
mhm. All right. Cool. So we have the webhook in place. Now the next thing we want to do is make that HTML page, right?
Right,
So one of the ways to do that is use the set node.
correct. And that's exactly what we do here.
Mhm.
So we want to pop up the set node, and then we've got the value. So the value here, what I have is the HTML, and I'm actually going to open up the HTML in a slightly different view. This is a tool that I use, one of my favorite open source free tools, Notepad++, and this is the actual HTML. So HTML in and of itself is relatively simple.
Mm-hmm.
Really, this is the HTML that does most of the work. But we've got a few other things in here. And so I want to point out a couple of things. Because we wanted this to be self-contained and we wanted it to be working within n8n and not really need any external tools or any external servers, we had to do a couple of interesting tricks with the HTML.
Mm-hmm.
So normally what you do is when you are in a web server and you're building out your HTML, you're building out your code to display stuff on the screen, what often you'll do is you'll just refer to, well, here's my CSS, which is all your styling, how it looks and how it feels. You'll put that into a separate file, you'll refer to that file, and away you go.
Right.
Same thing with images. You'll refer to the image file, go from there.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have that luxury.
Yeah.
I'm assuming you don't have another web server somewhere. It's easy enough to get them, and I was actually thinking of just building a web server and putting it on there. But I thought, let's challenge ourselves a little bit. So the first thing that we needed to do is we needed to figure out, okay, how do we deal with the CSS?
Mm-hmm.
How do we take that file? So that's relatively simple, actually. It's a simple matter of you go in and you copy your CSS. So if you have a CSS template, for example, you copy the CSS and you just put it in between a style tag. And that's all I've done here. So you will embed it all into that single file. Now you'll probably also notice that when I have the registration up here, you've got this nice header.
Yeah.
With a lovely picture, an image. We did not have access to that image file.
Exactly.
So that's where things got interesting. So all this gibberish is that image file. And it goes on for a while. There's a lot of it here. So this is a nifty little trick. They used to do this a little bit back in the 90s. Yes, I am that old. That they would embed the image right into the HTML. And that's what this is here.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got this embedded image, which is embedded into the CSS, which is embedded into the HTML. And so you'll see here, we have this URL, background image URL code, which is, and you'll see that in a lot of CSS. That's very common to see. But usually what you'll have here is you'll have a file listed after it. What we've done is we've actually taken this and we've converted the image into actual base 64. So this is the binary raw code for that image file. Now, you're probably thinking, well, how in the world do I do that? It's not like you can go in and start typing that in, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lovely little tool that I found. It's file to base 64 converter.
Mm-hmm.
And all you do is you would take that file, you would drop it in here.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, let me see if I can find a file for you guys without showing off all of the junk that I have sitting on my.
Well, while Jason is doing that, I'm curious. After our last live stream where we did something similar, we build a dashboard where we also, embed some HTML code. So whenever you made a request to a particular endpoint, n8n will give you a web page. So I was just curious, has anyone tried something like that? Have anyone, built n8n, like used n8n to build something different except for just connecting different services together? Let us know in the chat.
So here is find my desktop. Here we are. So some of you may recognize that picture.
I do.
So I just pulled it into here and I hit convert to base 64. And there's all that lovely code.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
And you literally copy and paste that right into your HTML file.
Interesting. Interesting. So now I have a question over here. Like there are, like hosting services where you can put the images out there, right, and get the URL for them. So
Yep.
why you decided to take this approach, convert it into base 64 and use it, and not just host it somewhere else and add the URL.
Because I'm never known for doing things the easy way. Uh,
Okay.
I, frankly, that's a lot of what I do. I've been doing IT and technical work for over 25 years,
Mhm.
and it's always been how can I use what I have right in front of me.
Mhm.
My nickname used to be MacGyver. Take what you've got around you and do what you need to get done. And
Right.
so I gave myself the challenge. How can I just use this n8n server that I'm building to
Mhm.
do everything I want all in one shot?
Gotcha.
And so that's kind of the neat thing is that now here we've got it. This is all embedded in here. All I need is n8n. I don't need to find another file server. I don't need to go
Mhm.
and see if I can access other things. I don't have to rely on a service somewhere else that could die. I'm in full control. And
Makes
so
sense.
that's the beauty of this. There really was nothing stopping me from putting this onto a Raspberry Pi
Mhm.
and loading Apache on there or Nginx and using that as a web server and pointing to it. But if I can do it all in one, why not? Plus, we all
Awesome.
learned something different and cool today.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And we got Arpan saying like that's an awesome approach. I completely agree with you, Arpan, over there. And we got SM saying have tried something similar, generating a dynamic form and serving it via a webhook, but still working for a nice form builder tool to quickly generate the HTML forms without
Mhm.
writing the code myself. I think Jason, you might have some options for him over here to try out.
Yeah, there are a few of them. I don't, and of course, being old, my memory is bad, and I don't remember what they are off the top of my head. But what we'll do is we'll make sure that we make those available to you
Mhm.
either when we post the live stream. But I do have a couple of tools I've been playing around with. Quite frankly, most of the time, all that I do is I just find a nice HTML template, convert it into a single page, and just plunk in the form values. Um, I do quite a bit of this actually for some of my clients. I have some clients that I build n8n workflows for them, and they've kind of latched onto this, and they really enjoy the fact that we can build stuff out. And I just typically say, here, you send this to your dev team, you make it look pretty.
Mhm.
I'm all about functionality, so I usually get somebody else to do it. But yeah, I will dig up some of those tools, and we can make sure that we get those into your hands.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason, for that. And now I'm gonna come back to my screen.
Hmm.
So while Jason was explaining about the HTML code, I snooped back, I copied the code and I added it to my set node. So now I am not sure what should be the value in the name field. So should
Sure.
this be HTML as well?
So and that's a good point. Really, the what we put in the webhook is
Mhm.
our hint, right? We in the webhook
Yeah.
we put the property HTML.
Hmm.
So we go back to the set node and we use that same property. And
Right.
that's kind of I'm just going to throw this out there. It's a bit of a pet peeve of mine. Is often when people are doing tutorials and showing you how to do things, they just say, "Oh yeah, just plug this in here." In my mind, it's more important to understand why this is HTML and
Hmm.
not that it is HTML. And so that's why. So you can actually put it anything. If in the webhook, you know,
Hmm.
if we had called it P Diddy,
Hmm.
we could have called the other one P Diddy as well, and it would have worked just fine.
All right. So the main thing to note over here is whatever property name we enter over here, it should be the same in the set node.
They have to match up absolutely.
Awesome.
And there are tricks that you can do. So, for
Hmm.
example, in the set node, we could instead of manually typing in HTML, we could have actually used an expression in there and referenced to the value of what that was on the other side. Then you could name it anything you want, and it
Right,
would
right, right.
show up here identical. But
Huh, right.
that's a nerd level 2 trick.
Yeah. All right. Uh, because we are sending a binary file at the movement, right?
Hmm.
What the set node will give me is just some text. So I
Correct.
still need to convert it into binary.
You do. So in order to do that, we're using a third binary tool. So it's called move binary.
Okay. So the move binary data.
That's the one. Yeah. So what this one does is you can think of it as a converter,
Mm-hmm.
and it converts information between JSON and binary, or binary to JSON, depending on which direction you want to go.
Mm-hmm.
So for this one, we want to go JSON to binary.
All right. And again over here, the destination key. Now this should
Right.
also be HTML because we have the property name as HTML.
Correct. But we're going to make another change first because
Mm-hmm.
in the information that we have other data that we don't
Right.
do. Because
Right. Right.
whenever you spit out data from an n8n node, there's actually more going on in behind the scenes. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm going to take a moment and plug the book that Tane and I are writing. I just finished writing chapter 3 in an all-nighter yesterday, and we were talking about data. And the data that is in behind n8n is there's more to it than what you typically see. And so
Mm-hmm.
we need to actually, when converting it to a binary, we need to clean it out and
Right.
just do the stuff we need. So the convert all data button, we
Mm-hmm.
need to actually turn that off.
Okay.
And then our source key is going to be HTML,
All right.
and destination will be HTML as well.
All right. So this is what I have understood right now. So because our set node, in the set node, we have a HTML source with
Yep,
the name HTML, and
yep,
that's why we are using that as the source key.
correct.
And destination key is HTML over here because we are referencing this in our webhook node.
Right. So in the destination key, it
Hmm.
literally could be anything. We can put anything in there we want.
Okay.
Um, I just use HTML just for consistency, so we go
Hmm.
across.
Okay. Okay.
Now
Makes
we are
sense.
going to add two other options in here. We don't have to, but I
Okay.
like to do it for two reasons. One, it makes your workflows a little bit easier to read,
Hmm.
and it also follows along with a better standard.
Right.
So we're going to add some options here. So if you click on the add option, the first one we're going to do is file name.
Okay.
And I just called this one form.html.
Makes sense.
The next one we're going to do is we're going to add another one, and it's a MIME type. So
All
for
right.
those of you who are not familiar with MIME types, this is essentially how web servers and web browsers recognize information on the internet, and they know what to do with it.
Hmm.
So again, not really 100% necessary, but it is good to do this to follow standards. So the MIME type that we're actually going to be generating is text/HTML.
Okay.
Perfect. Yep.
Perfect. Okay.
And then the last one we're going to do
Hmm.
is we're going to add one more option, and it's the use raw data. And we want to turn that on. So the reason we do the use raw data is that n8n does, again, a lot of things in the background with data and interpretation and so on. The use raw data allows us to say, you know what, grab it and just
Hmm.
push it out. Don't worry about processing it. Don't worry about doing anything. So it does a couple of things. One, it just pushes the data the way we want it to be pushed out. Two, because there's less processing going on, it actually makes your n8n workflows a little bit more efficient, and they use less resources.
Interesting.
And
That's
that's it.
interesting. All right. So let's try it out. So I'm gonna copy the text URL
Yeah.
and execute my workflow.
That looks
Awesome.
familiar.
Yep. This is interesting. So now, quick question: if I submit, what would happen?
Try it.
Let's try it out. And, okay. Huh. So I got an error over here. This is
Mm-hmm.
interesting. So because we didn't configure the URL for the submission.
So actually, we did configure the URL for the submission. Sorry, we configured where it's sending it. We
Okay.
have not configured to receive it yet.
Right.
So
Okay, yeah.
so there's a couple of things going on here. First of all, the data you put into the set node for the HTML is just the straight HTML that I gave you.
Right, yeah.
Well, guess what? That's designed to push it to my server.
Okay. Right. Yeah.
So if you want to flip over to my screen, I'll bring up my HTML and I'll show everybody here the key. So right here is an important piece of code, the form action. What this does is, so we've created this form in HTML. This URL here tells you where to send it. Well, this is sending it over to mine.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. Now it makes sense.
Right? So in yours, you're going to have to change it over to send it to your service that you are going to create. A couple of things to keep in mind about this, and this is why it's so important to remember this part of the web form, is that you will have to change this a few times. So first of all, you'll have to use in here, you'll have to create a new webhook and give it the test location for when you're testing. And then when you go live into production, you'll have to change this over again into your production URL.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So that's why it's important to know this bit.
So is there a way that I can, add some notes in here so that I know what should be the next step when it's, completed, when I build this thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got sticky notes that I can put on my screen, but unfortunately, when I do that, that doesn't help you because you won't see it.
Yeah, exactly.
So within n8n, actually, there is a node called no-op.
Okay.
And I use no-op for writing a lot of notes and comments. So no-op literally does nothing. And that allows you to have a little reminder there that you can throw stuff in. You can also do it in the node itself. So if you go into the webhook node, you can delete the no-op. I just wanted to show that one because that one, a lot of people don't think of the no-op as a way to record information. They look at it and go, why do I want a node that does nothing? Well,
makes sense.
It does nothing in the workflow, but it does something for you.
Right. Yeah.
So if you go into webhook 1 there, the one that you've just created, you can put under settings, you'll notice there's a notes section.
All right.
And in there, you can say, remember to switch the code in the set node to point to the right URL or whatever you want, whatever you need to remind yourself.
Switch the URL. Let's do the set node. All right. So now the other question I have, if I close this, it's going to save the node in the node, right?
Correct.
But how do I remember that I have a node?
Yeah, and that's actually fairly common. So if you open up the webhook 1 again and go back to your settings, there's a couple of little tricks here. So there's you see that radio button where it says display note. So if you click on that and then close it again, you'll note that there's a little reminder there.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. If you want to open that up again. The other thing that I also do is I will sometimes change the node color. And I'll put anything, I'll create red, for example. I'll use that as color. And then I know that when if you close it, you'll note that the node now is a red color. And what I know in my head is, okay, any node that's red, I need to go back and double check to make sure everything is set properly. Take a look at my notes and go back and see what needs to be done in order for it to all work properly. And that's a really good way of being able to remind yourself to do things, and also a good way of having these nodes pop out and say, oh, you know what, if I'm running into problems, check these first. Because chances are that's where the issues are. I forgot something or what have you. So those are a big help along the way. Because with this workflow, there is a lot to remember and a lot of different things. So even in your set node,
Mm-hmm.
you could even put a note in your set node that says, you know, remember to modify the URL in the form, and you can change that node to a different color so that you know it needs to be dealt with. Yeah, and don't forget to display your note, and there you go.
Nice. Awesome. This looks now much better, and I think this is gonna help me, get this visual cues whenever I need,
Hmm.
and tell me like this would be your next step, and these are the nodes that you now need to focus on.
Yeah, a common mistake that people make when they're building workflows, and this goes for any development environment. It doesn't necessarily have to be n8n
Mm-hmm.
or even workflow based. Is that we always assume that we're going to remember what we've done, and we never do. And so, this is all simple and easy when you're in the moment, and it's all fresh in your mind. Trust me, uh, a year from now, heck, for me, a week from now, um, you're not going to remember what you did and why you did it. And especially when you start looking at, some of your code, like what I was showing you on my screen,
Mm-hmm.
I've got like 200 lines of code. Are you going to remember which line specifically is going to do what? You might. I know I don't. So I think it's good that you put little reminders for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And the more you do this type of thing, if you've written one workflow, yeah, you might remember it actually because it's just one workflow. I'm already into like the hundreds of workflows that I've written, and
Oh,
and some of them are like I literally have some of the JavaScript in some of those is a few hundred lines of JavaScript in a function node. So,
oh,
am I going to remember what workflow and what function node, on what server? Because of course I have more than one n8n server. Like I've got about 12 or 14 by now. Are we going to remember which one it's on? Probably not. So, document your stuff in line as much as you can. That, if you take nothing else away from what you're learning today, is document your stuff.
awesome. That's a really good and a really important thing because this is something that I learned very recently, and I'm also following now this practice.
Hmm. Yeah,
Awesome.
and it's really useful to put as much as you can in those notes.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about what the node does. Talk about things that you've had to do. Put in there challenges. Use it like a tech diary if you have to, because the more information you have in there to spark your memory, you'll go, oh yeah, that's right. That's what that was for. The better.
Interesting.
It just makes your
Interesting.
life so much easier later on. Don't make what you're doing today the problem of
Mm-hmm.
future you.
Right, right, yeah.
Because guess what? That will be you eventually.
Makes sense, yeah. All right, now let's come back to our workflow over here,
Hmm.
and we have added the webhook node.
Yeah.
So because now we will be sending some data, so this time it should be a post request, right?
Yeah, you know what? We can do a post request.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was bad, and I still use the get. So you
Okay.
can still use a get, and and you're right. It should probably be a post,
Mm-hmm.
only because you are submitting data.
Right.
And I built this. I built this quick because frankly I forgot about building this, and I was going to be doing it in the community
Mm-hmm.
as a demo. So yeah, I just threw get in there. So we'll just use get for now. But one of
All
the things
right.
I'd like to do is once we get this all built, I want to come back and we
Mm-hmm.
want to fix up some of these things
Right.
because there's a different way for us to do some of the web stuff, and there's a
Mm-hmm.
different way for us to do this. And quite frankly, I'd like to do it right. So we'll get the uh, the red green, and so for those of you who are from Canada and are old enough, you will appreciate that comment. For the rest of you, um, I'm just going to say keep your stick on the ice. Um, do a
Okay.
quick Google for red green, and it'll make more sense.
All right.
Um,
Okay. Yeah. So I just changed the URL over here. Now I'm gonna execute the node and try submitting the form once again.
mhm.
So if now I submit, huh. Okay, I think did I save the workflow? Let's go back. I'm gonna refresh this. It got executed once. If I execute the workflow once again, let's see. Cat is not registered. Huh. This is
Hmm.
interesting.
So a couple of things here. The
Mm-hmm.
good news is tells me that that the HTML that you set
Mm-hmm.
up is actually pointing to your instance of n8n.
Right.
So that's the good news. The bad news
Mm-hmm.
is that it doesn't know. So it's saying that the webhook is not registered.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to actually go through these codes.
Mm-hmm.
Most people will, and I love this as a technical person. Somebody will say, "Oh, I got an error. What's the problem?" And I'll say to them, "Oh, what was the error?" "Oh, I don't know. It just something popped up my screen. I just hit OK and carried on." And it's like, "Oh, well, they showed you that for a reason. So maybe next time grab a screenshot." Um, and so typically, in those instances, people will say, I got an error. And my response would be, yeah, you got a problem.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, well, how do I fix it? And I said, I don't know. I don't have anything to go on. This gives us something to go on. So if we want to
Yeah.
go back to that error message, there's a
Mm-hmm.
couple of interesting things in here. So the first one is the code. 404. 404 tells me quite a bit, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're doing things with web servers and so on, they're constantly passing these codes back and forth. And the code that we're looking for is a 200 or
Okay.
something that at least starts with a 2.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever you see a code that starts with a 4, you know that there is something that it's looking for that it can't get.
Mm-hmm.
And 404 specifically, and this is one of those codes that the average person on the internet will have actually seen and probably recognize. 404 means, you know what? You told me to go get something. I can't find it. It's not there.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It's like being told, hey, you know what? I parked the car on level 3 in stall 47. Go to it. And you go there and the stall is empty.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
This is the IT equivalent of that. So it's looking for this information. So the next piece is the message, and it says the requested webhook, and so you said get, and then this nice little string is not registered. So that's generated by n8n. So that is telling
Mm-hmm.
me that it did a get request, grabbed that string, and it's saying it's not registered. So that would tell me that it is, for some reason, it's not running.
Mm-hmm. So
Here's
I think I found that issue for now.
mhm,
So I like this asterisk symbol beside my workflow name, which gives
mhm,
me an indication that I
mhm,
didn't save the workflow. And
mhm.
because I didn't save this workflow, it didn't register this particular webhook.
Hmm. Let's give that a try.
All right, so I just use the shortcut Command S to save my workflow,
Mhm.
and I'm gonna submit it once again. Okay, let's refresh it. Let's run it again. And no, okay. Hmm.
So
So
let's think.
it's still.
Let's walk through this process a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're doing testing with webhooks, the way that n8n works is because we want to be able to see what's going on behind the scenes. We want to be able to see what is happening. Um, what it does is it'll run, wait for the webhook to pop up,
Mm-hmm.
and then the webhook the workflow will finish so that we can see what's going on.
Right.
How many webhooks are we running?
We are running two webhooks.
Correct. So how many times do we have to execute the workflow to run 2 webhooks?
So if we run it once, it would run one of the webhook, right, based on what request we send. So if we want to run it again for a different webhook, we might have to execute the workflow once again.
Right. So what we'll do is let's go back to the form.
Mm-hmm.
Go back one page. So what we see here is cached.
Okay,
We
yeah.
actually aren't pulling this from
And a 10.
from the n8n server. this is still sitting kind of in your system. So if you go back to your newsletter tab, you'll notice nothing's right. So let's execute the workflow and do a refresh. Perfect. So now we just pulled this from n8n. Go back. You'll notice that the webhook is run.
Yeah.
It is now stopped.
Yeah.
Because it is stopped, the other webhook is no longer registered.
Right. Okay.
So we need to run this again. So execute it. Go back to your form. Fill it out. And hit submit. Oh, we've got the same error. So go back to your newsletter. And you'll see, so this tells us some good stuff. You'll see that it was still running. You just stopped it. So are we pointing to the right webhook URL?
That's
So
what
say
I
we
am
go
thinking.
to. So did we point it to
no.
test, or do we point it to prod?
No, so it's a different URL now. I see,
There you go.
because over here it's 79T,
Yep.
while it here shows 79. All right, I'm gonna execute it once again.
Yeah. So do refresh.
Refresh.
Go back, run it again.
Okay, so now we don't get the error, but we got a message. Workflow got started.
Excellent.
And in n8n, if I come to my webhook
Great.
node, awesome. So I see some data as well.
Yeah.
This is interesting.
So this is the piece now that allowed us to push information through.
Right.
So when we built the webhook, we essentially built an API. And when we've built out the API, what you'll see there in the queries is the equivalent of pushing the information through at the end of the URL. So if you actually go to the other tab, look at the very top.
Right. Okay, yeah. Okay.
And this is one of the reasons that I did the get initially, is I can show you different ways that we can do this. So this here shows you that instead of filling out a form, we could have just done an API call with the information in it and still submitted it, which is kind of neat because you can actually, if you use the get, send out unique URLs to people. And instead of them having to fill it out, you could have that pre-built into the URLs. They just need to click the URL, grabs the information, and away it goes. So you can theoretically shortcut that. The nice thing about using the post, and we'll get into this later on when we update this, the nice thing about using post is that it allows you to submit this information, but it doesn't show up in your URL. It keeps it a little bit cleaner. But it's nice here now that we've got this information showing up in our query.
All right. So Jason, we got we are almost on time. So what do you want to do?
You know what? Let's save this where it is. And let's see if we have any other questions that we can finish off in 18 seconds. And let's plan for part 2.
Awesome. So everyone, if you want us to do a part 2, and if you want to see us build this workflow and even improve this workflow, just let us know in the comments. And you can also just, if you have any questions, quickly ask us, because Jason then has to get on a different job.
Yes, I do. I do have to feed the family somewhere along the line.
All right. Jason, where would be the best place for someone to reach out to you?
You know what? Your best bet is to take a look on Twitter. That's where you'll see some of the latest stuff. I'm also on the n8n Discord server. And I keep promising, I've been promising for years that I'll build a web page somewhere along the line. So maybe if you're lucky, I'll do that somewhere. I've been, unfortunately, I need to build one for my daughter this weekend. And that's where my focus ends up going. But hey, we're going to have some interesting stories because she and I are actually building a robot that uses Scratch. And she's using that for actually a job interview. So
Nice.
yeah, there's always something weird and interesting coming out of my basement. And no, this is not my mom's basement, despite what some people are saying.
All right, everyone. Thank you for joining in, and thank you, Jason, for teaching us how we can build a newsletter system. Uh, in the next stream, we will continue this, and we'll build and try to at least build the first version so that people can
Yep.
actually get started. But in the meantime, if someone wants to use this workflow and try it out on your own, here is the link that you can use. So Jason has already shared it on n8n. So anything, Jason, that they should be careful about when they use this workflow?
Make sure that you go into that HTML, that first set node. Make sure that
Hmm.
you're pointing the form to the right location.
Right.
And and the other thing is you're going to have to set up base row, and we haven't
Hmm.
gotten to base row yet. So there's a bunch of things that we need to do in there. So you have to build the tables out, so on and so forth. But go in there and play. Just dig in there, destroy it, try different things, see what it does, experiment. It's all about experimenting. Um, as I've taught my kids, if you expect to do it right the first time, you're not going to get anywhere. So just go in, break it, fail. Um, Failure is a great educator.
Wow. That's a really good point, a good quote to end the stream. Thank you everyone once again for joining in, and thank you, Jason, for teaching us. Everyone have a nice day. Bye.
Bye, buddy.